The air in the Thanaxian border sanctuary smelled like sterilized metal and tension, both freshly scrubbed and neither fooling anyone. Rhett adjusted the stiff collar of his academy field uniform, eyeing the jagged enclosures lining the observation corridor. Each habitat was reinforced with shimmering energy barriers, lined with raw stone slabs, and oddly silent. No enrichment toys, no scent trails. No movement, even from the so-called rehabilitated Apex-class fauna lurking behind the glass. "This place gives me hives," mumbled Lyra, the feline-faced Solari cadet beside him, flattening her ears. "It's a predator reserve," Rhett replied absently. "You're not supposed to feel welcome." The corridor buzzed with overlapping conversations, mostly nervous. Cadets from 7 species made up this cohort of the Galactic Peacekeeping Academy, freshly uniformed, mostly green, and all just a bit too eager to ask questions that revealed how little they knew. Except Rhett. He just watched. Their instructor, a stern Thanaxian female built like a bunker wall, led the group toward a vaulted viewing platform. Her scales were matte black, armor-like, and her posture announced she had no time for weakness. The platform looked down into a chamber 30 meters across, ringed by plasma barriers and lit from above with UV-spanning spotlights. Below, a creature the size of a hoverbike paced the chamber in uneasy loops. 6 legs moved with unnatural fluidity. Obsidian hide shimmered with faint bioluminescent streaks along its back and flanks. A fan of short dorsal spines flicked with each twitch. Its wide eyes reflected the light like polished gems. It was beautiful and wrong. "This," the Thanaxian barked, "is Unit 7, a juvenile of our border world predator strain, genetically unstable, emotionally volatile. It will never be released." The cub, if that word still applied to something with a jaw built like a bone saw, sniffed at the air. Slowly, it turned its gaze upward toward the platform. Its eyes met Rhett's. He didn't blink, but something cold tapped down his spine. "Our handling teams maintain containment with biometric locks," the instructor continued. "It has been conditioned to respect proximity limits via pulse training and isolation reinforcement. You will witness a controlled demonstration." Several cadets shifted uncomfortably. Jettons, in particular flighty avians with glassy skin, seemed physically incapable of stillness. One of them whispered to the other in rapid chirps. Rhett made no sound, but noted the tension. Even among predator species, fear hung thick as smoke. Lyra leaned in slightly. "Why does it keep watching us?" Rhett tilted his head. "Because it knows we're watching it." The Thanaxian below signaled to a team of handlers in armored suits. They approached a panel near the barrier with brisk, practiced steps. "Observe," the instructor called out. "Containment will be maintained at all times. Do not panic." The first biometric anchor buzzed to life with a violet shimmer. The cub flinched. Then, with a soft crack and sizzle, the shimmer blinked out. For half a second, the room held its breath. Then all hell broke loose. The cub's posture shifted, not pounce, not play, something in between. It reared back on its hind 4 limbs, shoulders bunching, eyes dilating. A pulse of static erupted from the barrier console. Then the barrier dropped entirely. The cub leapt. Not toward the handlers, not toward the Thanaxians. It leapt straight through the exit hatch that led into the observation corridor. A shriek split the air. "It's loose!" someone screamed. 2 Jettons fainted before hitting the floor. A Ventari cadet dropped to his knees and threw up. Lyra grabbed Rhett's arm hard enough to leave marks. The instructor's voice roared over the comms, ordering full lockdown. But the cub was already inside. It moved like water, too fast for its size. Shoulder spines flared as it skidded past 2 cadets, scrambling for the emergency exit. A security bot deployed from the wall, optics blinking red, but hesitated. Its programming forbade engaging Apex juveniles directly. Another cadet tripped, skidding across the polished floor. The cub turned toward the fallen figure, nostrils flaring. Rhett didn't think. He moved. He stepped forward, slow and deliberate, heart punching against his ribs. His hands weren't shaking yet. He felt the panic around him like heat, like a storm on the skin. The cub's muscles tensed. One more twitch and it'd pounce. So, Rhett whistled. Short, rising in pitch, a familiar melodic trill. The cub froze. Its head swiveled toward him. It sniffed. The predator took a step, then another. The clatter of panicked claws behind Rhett faded into silence. Even the bots paused mid-deployment. The only sound left was the thump of the cub's heavy footfalls on steel. Then it sat, right on Rhett's lap. With a heavy chuff that shook Rhett's chest, the predator curled its bulk around him like a giant armored house cat. The pressure made his legs ache immediately, but he didn't move. He didn't dare. The cadets stared, dumbstruck. The Thanaxian instructor didn't speak. Security teams flanked the entrance, weapons raised but unused. The cub yawned, revealing double-jointed jaws and a mouth like a bear trap. It gave a low, contented chirp and nudged its blunt muzzle against Rhett's side. Rhett exhaled slowly. Someone's not getting enough enrichment time. 10 minutes later, he was still sitting there, stroking the cub's side with careful, measured pressure, as medics tried and failed to get close. The instructor's voice came in over comms, low and tight. "Do not attempt to move. Do not provoke. We are preparing sedatives." "No," Rhett said firmly. "Don't. You'll undo the imprinting." "She is not imprinted. She's curled around me like a weighted blanket. Pretty sure the imprinting ship has sailed." The Thanaxians weren't amused. Eventually, the cub stood of its own accord after Rhett whispered something else under his breath and allowed itself to be coaxed back toward the containment handlers, albeit with visible reluctance. The moment its tail vanished around the corridor bend, Rhett's legs gave out. Medics caught him before he hit the floor. "Do not sedate me either," he mumbled as they checked his vitals. "I'm not hurt." "You've got early-stage compression bruising on both femurs," the medic replied. "You sat under the weight of a 200-kilogram predator for 10 minutes. "Yeah," Rhett muttered. "That tracks." They gave him an ice pack and told him to lie flat. He refused. The next 2 hours were a blur of decontamination, biometric scans, and escalating levels of security clearance he didn't know he had access to. Rhett kept quiet until they hauled him into the debrief chamber, a windowless room with too many surveillance nodes and one very angry Thanaxian command handler. "How did you neutralize the threat?" she demanded. "What is that sound you used?" "A whistle." "It obeyed a whistle?" "It obeyed a conditioned cue reinforced by emotional desensitization and trust-based familiarity," Rhett said. "But sure, let's call it magic if you want." She paced. "You have military animal training?" "Worked summers at a xenological preserve in the Sierra Continent Range," Rhett said. 4 years before I got accepted into GPA, specialized in cross-species behavioral adaptation and trauma therapy." The Thanaxian's tail twitched. "You believe this predator has trauma?" "It's locked in a sterile box with no enrichment, no stimuli, no routine, and no bonds. Of course it has trauma. You're keeping it alive, not raising it." She hissed low. "You're raising apex predators in isolation tanks," Rhett said, sitting back, exhausted. "On Earth, we call that a lawsuit waiting to happen." No one spoke. Eventually, the instructor entered, silent and simmering. She stared at him for a long moment. Then she muttered, low enough that only he heard, "You are dangerous." Rhett looked at her, tired but calm. "No, I just understand things with teeth." The next morning started with a limp. Rhett shuffled through the sterile halls of the Thanaxian sanctuary's south wing, a dull throb spreading from both thighs down to his knees. The compression bruises were mild. The medic had said no fractures, just tissue damage, but he moved like a man twice his age. The provided cold wraps were already warming uselessly against his skin. "You shouldn't be walking," said Juno, the Ventari cadet who'd thrown up during the incident. He kept his distance, translucent ears flicking nervously. "You could exacerbate the injury." Rhett didn't answer. The pain was real, but it grounded him. He walked slower than usual, nodding occasionally to passers-by, mostly Thanaxian handlers, who stared and didn't return the gesture. He couldn't blame them. Word had spread fast. The apex cub now responded only to Rhett. The handlers were furious, embarrassed. More than a few had tried re-establishing their authority over the creature after containment was restored the night before. None succeeded. 3 had been warned off with low growls. One handler, a tall male with seniority ribbons carved into his scales, had pushed further. He'd tried a sonic prod. The cub hadn't attacked, it had simply gone rigid, stared straight at Rhett on the other side of the viewing glass, and refused to move until the handler left. That's when the Thanaxians stopped calling it a cub and started calling it his cub. It was insulting, of course, but the way they said it, like it was a slur, made Rhett's stomach twist. He met Instructor Larissa in the secondary observation bay, an enclosed gallery with reinforced walls and an artificial forest chamber beyond the glass. Unit 7 stalked between plastiform trees, twitchy and unsure, ignoring the offered food cube on the rock outcrop. "He has not eaten," Larissa said, arms folded behind her back. Her scales glinted blue in the sunlight spilling from the overhead skylight. "Since yesterday. He refuses the handlers. He only responds to your voice." "Did anyone try removing the scent blockers from the food?" Larissa turned, eyes narrowing. "Everything in that chamber smells like chemical sealant and burnt ozone," Rhett continued. "He's scent-driven. You're serving him bricks. He is not a pet." "He's also not a protocol droid," Rhett snapped, sharper than intended. "If you want him to recover from yesterday's panic event, you can't just treat him like a defective rifle." Larissa blinked once. Her expression didn't change. 15 minutes, she said. "Inside the enclosure. Supervised. No direct contact unless the subject initiates. Do you consent?" Rhett exhaled through his nose, shoulders stiff. "Yes." The first step inside felt like walking into a church made entirely of teeth. The trees were false metal cores wrapped in biosynthetic bark, and the sky was just a dome simulating daylight with smart panels, but the air was real, damp, heavy with anticipation. Unit 7's eyes found him instantly. The cub didn't move. Rhett did not whistle this time. Instead, he sat on a rock about 10 meters away, knees complaining audibly, and waited. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Unit 7 paced once, then again, and finally slunk forward in a low, tentative arc. Rhett waited. At 4 meters, the cub paused. He tilted his head and made a soft, open, palmed gesture low to the ground, an earth-based posture of non-aggression used in rehabilitation clinics. The cub crept forward, then settled beside him, not touching, but near enough that Rhett could hear its breathing, slow and unsteady. "Good," he murmured. "Better." Above them, in the command bay, Instructor Larissa observed silently. Cameras whirred, tracking everything. The next 3 days blurred into a strange routine. Every morning, Rhett limped into the enclosure. Every morning, the cub now officially logged again as Unit 7 greeted him with a mixture of curiosity and cautious attachment. First, it allowed petting, then brushing. Then, startling everyone, it began mimicking simple commands. "Sit," Rhett would say. The cub would hesitate, then slowly fold its legs underneath, rump hitting the reinforced floor with a soft whump. Positive reinforcement came in the form of scent-activated reward dispensers, modified Earth tech shipped in overnight by diplomatic request. The Thanaxians initially bristled at the intrusion, but the results were undeniable. By day 4, Unit 7 was playing fetch. "It's not fetch," Rhett clarified as Juno filmed from behind the glass. "It's object tracking and return behavior with reinforced recall cues. Fetch implies he enjoys it." "He brought the ball back 3 times, Juno said. "He enjoys it." Rhett rubbed his temple. "Let's just say he's less miserable doing it than sitting in a dark corner chewing on his own tail." The cub dropped the textured sphere at Rhett's feet and looked up expectantly. Rhett tossed it again. This time, the run was smoother, more playful. But there were setbacks, too. On the second afternoon, a visiting dignitary, a Jehetan military attaché, insisted on observing a training session. He wore a pungent cologne and stood too close to the glass. Unit 7's demeanor changed instantly. The spines along its back stood rigid. Its mouth trembled. A low rumble formed in its chest. Rhett noticed it too late. He moved forward just as the cub lunged not at him, but at the viewing window, jaws spread, slamming into the transparent barrier with a shuddering impact. The dignitary squawked and fell backward. Rhett turned sharply and snapped, "Out! Now!" The handlers removed the visitor immediately. Rhett didn't raise his voice again, but the tension in his spine lasted the rest of the day. That night, Unit 7 refused to eat. "I missed the trigger," Rhett admitted during debrief. He was overwhelmed. Too many new variables. I should have seen it earlier. You blame yourself? Asked Larissa, arms folded. I am responsible for him in the enclosure, Rhett said. I'm not here to show off. I'm here to help him survive, you people. The Thanaxian said nothing, but her expression shifted just slightly. By the end of the week, the class was invited into the secondary enclosure chamber, smaller, safer, controlled, one cadet at a time. They wore neutral gray suits, carried no electronics, and followed strict protocols. Rhett gave each of them a full behavioral briefing and a demonstration. His voice was calm, even, measured. But his limp hadn't improved much. Are you really sure? Lyra asked, adjusting the suit's wrist strap. That thing almost killed us. If you move slowly, don't react fearfully, and stay in your posture, you'll be fine. That's a big if. Rhett nodded. I know. Unit 7 was already inside, tail sweeping the floor lazily. Rhett entered first. The cub rose and padded toward him immediately, head low, eyes bright. Rhett gave a short whistle and tapped the floor once. The cub sat. Lyra entered slowly. The room was silent. She took a few steps. The cub sniffed the air, blinked, and tilted its head. Lyra followed the guidance: one step, wait, one step, wait, until she stood within arm's reach. Rhett gave her a look. She extended a hand. The cub lowered its head and licked her glove. Lyra let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. I think I peed a little, she whispered. Rhett grinned. Then, it was a perfect first meeting. More cadets followed over the next 2 days. Trust grew. The cub tolerated brushing, petting, even belly rubs briefly, and only from those it recognized. The handlers, at Larissa's stern request, began shadowing Rhett's methods. One Thanaxian, a male named Kareth, finally approached Rhett between sessions. You do not dominate him, he said. No, Rhett replied, massaging his bruised thighs. That was never the goal. Kareth seemed to wrestle with that. Why does he obey you? He doesn't, Rhett said. He chooses to listen, because I give him a reason to. Kareth stared into the chamber, where Unit 7 now rolled on his back in the dirt, letting Juno gently scratch between the spines. It is shameful, Kareth muttered, to see him like this, soft. No, Rhett said. This is strength. You just never gave him a reason to show it. The Thanaxian said nothing more. But the next day, Kareth brought a handmade scent toy into the chamber. The cub accepted it. Rhett didn't say anything. He didn't need to. By the 7th day, Unit 7 could be walked on a bioharness, sat on command, and even respond to 2 Thanaxian handlers without incident. The alien cadets, once fractured by fear and suspicion, now shared wide-eyed stories and clumsy jokes, laughing in languages Rhett only half understood. Even Larissa allowed herself a single nod of approval after the final walkthrough. That night, as the lights dimmed in the training dome and Rhett finally sat down in the dorms with his legs elevated and 2 gel wraps tied across his thighs, Lyra dropped into the seat next to him. Do you miss him already? She asked. Rhett didn't answer right away. I keep thinking about how everyone saw a monster, he said finally, and he just wanted someone to stop flinching long enough to listen. Lyra tilted her head. You saw that day one? No, Rhett murmured, but I hoped it. She watched him for a moment. You're weird, she said softly, but good weird? Thanks, Rhett said, I think. He winced, shifting to ease the weight on his legs. You really should have let the medic's force rest. Rhett smiled faintly. Can't teach trust from the sidelines. The problem with progress was that someone always saw it as failure. Rhett leaned against the inner perimeter wall of the observation chamber, watching Unit 7 doze in a sunlit patch of synthetic moss. The cub's tail twitched occasionally, brushing the edge of a fallen toy, a hollow, scent-loaded block shaped like a boulder, now shredded at one corner. Just last week, the cub had nearly mauled a cadet from sheer panic. Now, he was napping midday with his spines relaxed. Don't get used to the peace, muttered Lyra from behind the glass. Rumor says we're being pulled out early. Rhett turned, stiffly. Pulled out? Why? Too many questions, she replied, brushing her hands on her uniform. Too much attention. The Thanaxian Council's under pressure. Word got out about the cub picking favorites. Rhett's stomach nodded. So now it's politics. Isn't it always? She left before he could respond, tail flicking once in frustration. Behind him, Unit 7 exhaled a long breath and rolled to his side, letting out a soft gurk, his version of a snore. But Rhett wasn't comforted. The summons came that evening, not from Larissa, but higher Thanaxian command. The conference chamber was carved like a cave, all sharp edges and recessed lighting. 8 Thanaxians sat at the semicircular table, their scales polished, weapons visible at their hips. No chairs for guests. Rhett stood. "You have disrupted an established containment doctrine," the central figure declared without preamble. "Your methods defy generations of behavioral conditioning." "They're working," Rhett said, already exhausted. "You've got a cub who's eating, playing, interacting. Isn't that the point? It is not domestication we seek. It's not domesticated. It's regulated by trust, not pain." The Thanaxian to the left leaned forward. "You disabled its natural aggression. You made it docile." "No," Rhett said firmly. "I made it safe." Murmurs rippled through the council. The head of the table flicked his claw across a tablet. "You're being removed from the enclosure program. Effective tomorrow." Rhett's jaw locked. "Why?" "You've contaminated the subject's imprinting cycle. The cub no longer responds to Thanaxian protocols. Your presence has degraded centuries of species handling knowledge. Then maybe your knowledge needs degrading." The silence that followed was a vacuum. Rhett knew he'd just crossed a line, but it was done. One of the junior counselors stood. "You will be confined to quarters until your class departs." "And the cub?" "It will be reassigned for clinical observation, with proper neural conditioning reinstated." They were going to sedate him, reprogram him, erase all progress. Rhett's chest tightened, breath catching behind his sternum. "You're going to break him." "He was born broken," snapped the commander. Rhett said nothing. He turned and left before his temper did something unforgivable. He didn't go to quarters. Instead, he limped, slow, aching to the north hallway of the sanctuary, the long corridor that ended at the glass viewport overlooking the cub's night enclosure. No security was posted, just a locked panel. He palmed the console. Predictably, it flashed red. "Access denied." He leaned forward, resting his forehead against the cool wall. Behind the glass, Unit 7 stirred. Even in the dark, his eyes found Rhett. The cub let out a soft whine and padded closer, pressing one paw clawed, padded, massive against the transparent barrier. Rhett did the same. "You did everything right," he said quietly. "I'm sorry I didn't." The paw didn't move. That night, a containment alert rang through the cadet dormitory. Emergency klaxons, red light. Rhett sat up fast, pain shooting through his thighs as he planted both feet on the floor. He limped toward the corridor before the announcement had even finished. "Subject Unit 7 has breached inner enclosure boundaries. Security Protocol Zeta 4 is in effect. All personnel must remain in quarters." But Rhett knew exactly where Unit 7 was heading. And he knew why. The cub wasn't attacking, he was looking. 30 seconds later, Rhett reached the intersection outside the central medwing. A Thanaxian was on the ground, conscious, barely, scratched. His sonic prod lay discarded and sparking against the wall. Unit 7 stood over him, tense but not striking. His spines were half raised, mouth closed. He was watching the man alert, angry but holding. Rhett moved fast. "Whistle now," he muttered to himself. He did. A soft rising trill, familiar, steady. The cub jerked slightly, then turned. Saw him. And bounded forward not to pounce, but to press his face into Rhett's chest with a low, relieved groan. Rhett staggered under the weight, catching the wall with his shoulder. The pain lanced up his hip, but he didn't care. "I know," he whispered. "I know, buddy. It's okay." The security team arrived less than a minute later. Rhett didn't fight it when they pulled him away. He didn't argue as they wrestled Unit 7 into a reinforced harness. He just kept repeating one thing, over and over. He didn't attack. He didn't attack. The Thanaxian medic on the floor later confirmed it. Superficial wounds, no broken bones. The cub had pinned him, not mauled. Intent mattered. But not enough. The next day, Rhett was confined to the medical wing. His bruising had worsened from the impact. The medics finally insisted on full rest. He couldn't even stand for the morning briefing, so he watched from his cot as the cadets prepared for departure. Lyra stopped by during final check-in. "They're separating him," she said quietly. "Not sedation, full relocation, off-world." Rhett didn't answer. He kept looking at the glass after they dragged you out, all night. Still, Rhett said nothing. "They're afraid of him, you know," Lyra added. "And of you. Not because you're dangerous, because they were wrong." That finally made Rhett look at her. "I didn't mean to embarrass them." "You didn't," she said. "You just showed them what they didn't want to see." Departure was silent. Cadets lined up in the launch corridor, bags in tow, voices hushed. Rhett was brought in last, supported between two GPA med aides, legs bandaged, slow and stiff. He walked on his own, barely, but refused a hover chair. As they moved toward the ship, a panel in the wall flickered. It opened. Behind it, a thick glass viewport into the secure holding zone, temporary, before off-world transfer. Unit 7 sat there, silent. When he saw Rhett, he rose fast, body tense, not aggressive, alert. He rushed to the glass, slammed his paw to it. The cadets froze. Rhett stopped walking. The med-aides hesitated. Then, against every instruction, Rhett stepped forward and raised his hand to the glass. The cub stared into him, and sat. The room held its breath. A Thanaxian instructor nearby muttered under his breath, watching the scene unfold. "Humans are terrifying." Rhett turned slightly, not smug, not amused. Just tired, and honest. "Nah," he said softly. "We just got good at surviving things with teeth." The ship doors hissed open behind him. He limped toward them without looking back. The shuttle bay lights flickered as the cadet transport lifted off from the Thanaxian border sanctuary. Rhett watched the surface vanish below them, shards of dark architecture wrapped in containment domes and fencing grids, disappearing into mist. He said nothing the entire ascent. Across the cabin, cadets filled the silence with half-hearted chatter. Some replayed the event files from Unit 7's breach. Others stared out the viewports, eyes darting, thinking too loudly. Rhett sat with both legs elevated, knees bound in compression wraps, a datapad resting in his lap, but untouched. The medics had insisted he rest the whole trip. He hadn't argued this time. They were 30 minutes into orbit when Instructor Laressa's voice came through the intercom. "Cadet Rhett, report to secure comms compartment, priority level." Rhett raised an eyebrow. Lyra gave him a curious glance. He sighed, shifting his legs down carefully. "Apparently I'm not finished disappointing important people." The secure compartment was a small, soundproofed chamber lined with hardened panels. The only light came from the holoterminal, already active. To his surprise, the face that appeared wasn't Thanaxian. It was human, late 42nds, military buzz cut, sleepless eyes, GPA insignia on her shoulder. "Cadet Rhett," she said without preamble. "I'm Commander Maddox, Behavioral Sciences Division." He blinked. "Didn't expect Earth to dial in." "You drew attention, not just locally. Diplomatic probes, inquiry requests, 3 separate incident reports." Rhett leaned against the wall. "I'm guessing none of them painted a flattering picture." "Mixed at best," Maddox admitted, "but we're not concerned with flattery." She tapped something off screen. A side panel opened on the console. Rhett's training logs began to scroll his field notes, sensor recordings, interaction analytics with Unit 7. Every minute had been archived. "We've been watching the footage," Maddox continued. "Review board included 3 xenopsychologists and 1 trauma rehab specialist. Consensus was unanimous." Rhett's jaw tensed. That it was a mistake? That it was unprecedented success? He stared. "You de-escalated a Thanaxian apex juvenile using Earth-based protocols adapted in real time," she said. "Your methods were high risk, low authority, and wildly out of regulation, and they worked. I didn't. You were also injured. Multiple soft tissue contusions, disobeyed medical rest orders, argued with command, questioned policy in a classified council." "So what is this?" Rhett asked, voice low. "Commendation or court-martial?" "Neither," Maddox said. "It's a proposal." She pressed another command. The screen flickered. A blueprint appeared. Rhett frowned. "That's not the sanctuary." No, it's Earth. Sierra Continent Preserve. We're retrofitting one of the southern domes for long-term xenobehavioral observation. We want to transfer Unit 7 there. With you. He stared at the projection, words catching behind his teeth. You're asking me to adopt a Thanaxian predator. We're asking you to finish what you started. Rhett exhaled slowly. Does he even survive the trip? Stress, sedation, new atmosphere? He'll be monitored hourly. No sedation. We're working on a temporary transit cocoon with olfactory cues patterned after your uniform. Rhett laughed once, humorless. You've already made the decision. We had to, Maddox said, because if he stays there, he's going back under the scalpel. He closed his eyes, then opened them. I'll need 3 things, he said. First, direct access to habitat design. No sterile boxes. Granted. Second, local behavior techs. I'll need a support team. Small, but trained. You'll handpick them. Third. He hesitated. Third, Maddox said gently. He doesn't belong in a cage. I won't do it unless we're working toward freedom. Not just obedience, not just display. She nodded. Understood. The screen went dark. 2 weeks later, Rhett stood in a reinforced platform under a green Earth sky. The air smelled like cedar, not metal. Real wind tugged at the trees, real trees, not plastic trunks and scent scrubbers. Across the enclosure, the transport capsule hummed as it touched down. He heard the soft, rhythmic pulse of the security field winding down. Then the door hissed open. The first thing he saw was a snout. Then pause. Then a half-step stumble as Unit 7 emerged into daylight for the first time in his life. Rhett didn't move. The cub's spines bristled, confused, stunned by the light and smells. His eyes darted, uncertain. Then they found Rhett. The growl that followed wasn't threatening. It was familiar. A kind of grumble one might hear from a grumpy hound woken too early. Rhett whistled. Not sharp, not commanding. Welcoming. Unit 7 bounded forward, massive, clumsy, excited. He nearly toppled Rhett before curling tight around him in a full-body lean, purring with a deep, rolling resonance that vibrated through Rhett's chest. Easy, Rhett laughed, breath-catching. I just got cleared to stop limping. Behind them, the habitat techs watched silently from a monitoring station. He's different, one of them murmured. Rhett looked down at the cub, now chewing absent-mindedly on a stick. No, he said. He's just himself. Finally. The first few days were chaotic. The cub refused to sleep indoors. He pawed at real dirt like it was a toy. He stalked squirrels not to hunt, just to follow, and stared at rivers like they were alive. Rhett documented everything, logged every behavioral cue, mapped his scent patterns and rest cycles, but he also just sat with him. They watched sunsets together. Sometimes, the cub would doze with his jaw resting on Rhett's foot. It was too heavy. Rhett never moved. And for the first time in months, he stopped waking up with his jaw clenched. He started sleeping better, too. Weeks passed. Then months. Rhett trained new behaviorists, brought in a Solari specialist, and even consulted with a Jihetan neuroecologist who'd once written a thesis on predator empathy. The team expanded, slowly. But the cub, he stayed constant. Bigger now, calmer, sometimes stubborn, always watching. And still, the only person who could make him roll over with a whistle was Rhett. The message came quietly one afternoon. An encrypted GPA file, not urgent. Inside, a hollow recording. The Naxian instructors. Cadet debriefs. A compilation of footage from the original incident, now fully cleared and approved for training use. The last shot? Rhett, seated on the floor of the enclosure, Unit 7 asleep with his massive skull resting on Rhett's lap. No force, no harness, just trust. Rhett didn't cry. But he saved the file, then forwarded it to every behavior training institute he knew. Add enrichment, he wrote in the message, and stop calling them monsters. That evening, as the forest dimmed and the sun burned soft orange across the trees, Rhett sat with a mug of lukewarm tea on the platform railing. Unit 7 padded up quietly, then flopped beside him with a snort. You've got pine sap in your nose again, Rhett muttered, wiping it off with his sleeve. The cub grunted and placed a paw massive, clawed, and terrifyingly heavy on Rhett's lap. Rhett didn't flinch. He just kept sipping his tea. "You know," he said, glancing down, "there's a universe full of people who think you're a beast, a weapon." The cub blinked up at him. "But you're just... you." He looked out at the trees. "We survived each other," he said quietly. The cub chirped. Somewhere far above them, in orbit, a Thanaxian patrol ship passed silently, unaware that the most dangerous thing on Earth was no longer an apex predator. It was understanding.